Well, good morning, Sunday School kids. Pastor Al here. Nice to see you this morning. Hey, we got a really cool story today. I'll bet it's a story you've heard before. It's a story of a very young David, who's not King David yet, but who's just David, the shepherd boy, who comes down when the Israelites are having this big fight and standoff with this terrible, mean, huge, powerful army of people we call the Philistines. And they have one really big guy. It's bigger than anybody else, named Goliath, who challenges the Israelites to fight. And well, nobody wants to fight him except all of a sudden this one kid named David. Now, the thing that's really cool about this story and all of the stories is these aren't just made up stories. This is not like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This story really happened. I am kind of lucky in that I've been able to go to Israel a few times, and I've been to the valley where that battle took place several times. Let me show you a picture of the last time I went there. I took a group and we went up on a hill overlooking the valley of Elah where the battle took place. The hill and the place where I took this picture from right here, this is probably, we're not entirely sure, but probably the hill that the Philistines were on. And the hill that I'm pointing my camera at across the other side of the valley, well, that's probably the hill the Israelites were camped on, scared to come down and fight in the middle of the valley, not only against Goliath, but against all these Philistines who had chariots and were much better armed. So, in spite of the fact that it seemed like almost impossible odds, David knew one thing, that if God was on your side and you were doing what God told you, well, you were going to win. And we recognize that too, that God is the one ultimately who guides our steps and fights our battles. So I know you've heard this story before, but I hope you enjoy hearing it again. And just know to remember, this is a real story that happened in a real place to real people a long time ago. And I think that makes it extra special for us. Enjoy this morning's Old Testament Bible story.
The Young Hero and the Horrible Giant. God's people had some scary enemies, but the Philistines were the scariest of them all. And now the Philistines had come to fight them. The Philistines had a secret weapon called Goliath. Goliath was a terrifying soldier and, worst of all, a giant. A giant so strong and so tall and so scary that no one had ever been able to fight him and live to tell the tale. So, there they were, the Philistines standing on the top of one hill, God's people standing on top of the other. Every day, Goliath came out and shouted, "Send your best soldier to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves." No one spoke. No one moved. "Chickens!" Goliath bellowed. "Your God can't save you. I'll rip your heads off and have you on toast." His beady, greedy eyes glowered at them hungrily from under his horrible helmet, as if any minute he really might just gobble them all up. And he laughed his terrible laugh. Ha ha! It boomed, echoing horribly around and around the dry valley. Well, Goliath might just as well have been a green, slimy monster with 3 heads, because God's people froze with fear. Their eyes glazed over and they turned deathly pale. They knew if someone didn't do something quick, if someone didn't save them, but God would do something. He would send someone to save them. Now, you remember that David was the youngest son of Jesse? Well, his brothers were soldiers in the army. One day, when David brought his brothers their lunches, he saw Goliath, and he saw how scared everyone was. "Don't be afraid," David said. "I'll fight him for you." "Oh, you're only a little shepherd boy," the king said, "and Goliath is a great soldier. How will you fight him?" God will help me," David said. So the king gave David his royal armour to wear. But it was too heavy and too big, and David couldn't even walk. "I won't need this," David said. Instead, David picked out 5 smooth stones from the stream. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Took his slingshot and walked towards Goliath. Step, step, step. Goliath walked towards David. Thud, thud, thud. "You?" Goliath peered down at the small boy. "I am little," David shouted up to him, "but God is great." Goliath laughed an even terribler laugh than usual. It went. With just one swing of his giant sword, Goliath could finish the boy off. But David kept going. "It isn't how strong you are or how many swords and spears you have that will save you. It is God who saves you. This is God's battle, and God always wins his battle." David put a stone in his sling, swung it around, and let it go. The little stone flew whizz like a bullet through the air and struck Goliath, thud, right between the eyes. Goliath stopped laughing. He stumbled and staggered and crash fell dead. When the Philistines saw Goliath was dead, they ran away. And when God's people saw them running away, they cheered. God had saved his people. David was a hero. Many years later, God would send his people another young hero to fight for them and to save them. But this hero would fight the greatest battle the world has ever known.